Welcome, Adam's child, to this long-coming sermon, where, with the help of my faithful friend here, I have managed to scope out and map all of the wild creatures of the Mojave. We get to see which creatures are the most populous in the New Vegas region, which are the rarest, where they can be found, why they are there, and interesting facts about these mutated freaks that we could only discover by looking at them from this perspective. So let's crank up the rads, get the data from my mapping buddy, the Silent Cartographer, and map out New Vegas's creatures. Real quick, some ground rules. I know, boring, but I will have a small army of people filling the comments with similar things if I don't do this. All of these observations were done on a new game at player level 1. No progress has been made, and there's been no tainting of the data. This means the variants I observed may differ from what you see if you are higher level. I also took the liberty of deciding to exclude non-feral ghouls from the ghoul population, but I am including super mutants because this is my map, Adam dammit. Really, it's because ghouls integrate into common society more often and more easily, and there is a clear difference between feral and non-feral ghouls, while super mutants and Nightkin don't have the same level of distinction, even though Nightkin are a less stable kind of super mutant. Also, these numbers could be off by a bit because of the random interactive nature of Fallout. You never know what could happen to an NPC, but these numbers can give us an idea. Lastly, the approximate area they cover is estimated by the shaded bit, but a small circle in most circumstances denotes an interior location like a cave or a building. I also decided to label which location I think is the most dangerous of all the others for a given creature, and I'd be interested to know if you agree. In the process of making this video, I realized there are no proper difficulty or threat maps for Fallout New Vegas, so using my own data, I decided to just make one. This includes only creatures, no robots or human factions, which would make a difference, but this should still give us a pretty good indication. After classifying each creature as normal, difficult, and severe level threats, I colored their estimated roaming ranges green to red, green being the lowest threat creatures. Here it is in its full, cluttered glory. It ain't perfect, but you can clearly see a few things. The southwest is the lowest threat area by a wide margin, followed by the southeast. The area around New Vegas doesn't have much in the way of high-level creature threats, but the northeast and northwest corners are a different story altogether. I put in this handy little arrow most fans call the loop, which shows the most common path new players take from Good Springs to New Vegas. And the threat map makes a lot of sense when looking at this loop. My favorite part is this giant wall of red just north of Good Springs, which is where the game starts. All of this red consists of the nastiest creatures in the Mojave, which were put there intentionally to route the player through the counterclockwise loop. It's fun to see something mentioned so often plainly mapped out. I will be referring to the loop pretty often in this video, so don't immediately scrub this information from your brain. I know, object permanence can be hard. Fallout New Vegas also decided to take 4 of the most lethal creatures and give them an extra difficult legendary version. There is only one for Deathclaws, Cazadors, Nightstalkers, and Fire Geckos, and they can be seen here, represented by the skulls. With the exception of only one, they are all found in the corners of the map, places that players generally take longer to get to and therefore are higher level. But also, you aren't going to just run across a legendary super easily. You're going to need to explore. Let's start this off with the most numerous of all the creatures in the entirety of the game, and the first of many pop quiz questions. For those brave enough, write down your answers because there are some surprises here. Do you know what the most common creature is in the entire game? It is feral ghouls. The key with ghouls, of course, is that they prefer radioactive places, where they appear to derive health and a certain level of sustenance through the unlimited power of radiation. Incidentally, the southern part of the map has more of these areas that ghouls like to gather at, and there are noticeable gaps in the ghoul distribution in the middle of the map and the northwest. Now I want you to guess the location with the most ghouls. Ah crap, I already showed you the map. Well, it's Vault 34, a Vault-Tec vault with a very interesting history because it gave birth to one of the minor factions in the game, the Boomers, who occupy Nellis Air Force Base to the north. The vault itself requires a whole dedicated video. Suffice it to say that an internal struggle between the Overseer and the Vault Dwellers flared and turned violent, causing damage to the vault's ventilation, which led the local nuclear reactor to start melting down and unleashing copious amounts of beautiful, warm radiation. Those that didn't outright die because they didn't accept Adam into their hearts were transformed and ghoulified, save for 4 dwellers who are locked away from the radiation but are completely trapped. Vault 34 not only has the most ghouls, who seem to only roam inside the vault and attack any intruders like the golden geckos that live in the cave before the entrance, but they also have the most kinds of ghouls. The majority of ghouls are simple vault dwellers, which makes sense. This is a vault after all. This is followed pretty closely by vault security ghouls, who are clad in security uniforms and gear, which comprise a whole third of the population, and even vault security officers, who are almost another third, but are more dangerous and are glowing ones. I would suspect that with nearly 2/3 of the population being security and only 1/3 being normal vault dwellers, this is a case of survivorship bias, because there was a lot of fighting going on, and the more well-armored and well-armed vault security probably had a better survival rate than the normal vault dweller. This location is also home to the super unique Overseer Ghoul, who was the Overseer. Where would you be without me explaining all this extremely complicated lore? Lost. Completely lost is the correct answer. The Overseer is the only glowing one that is orange and is the closest thing to a legendary ghoul that we have in New Vegas. Given this vault's proximity to New Vegas and other populated locations like Camp Gulch and Nellis Air Force Base, if these ghouls ever decided to start wandering out of the vault en masse, it could be a dangerous threat and quite the epic invasion. I'm giving this location the Deadliest Ghoul Spot award because of the high population, high proportion of strong variants, having the Overseer Ghoul, and the cramped confines of the vault makes fighting a lot more challenging. The next 3 largest populations are all the way down in the south, with the Repconn facility having the second highest population, or, well, they did at one point before all the ghouls that lived there were attacked. A group of Nightkin were convinced that they could find some of the stealth boys here that they covet, and they left a trail of blood and dead ghouls in their wake. A cult of ghouls that formed around a glowing one named Jason Bright sought refuge here, seeking to use the old pre-war rockets to reach what they call the Great Beyond. But those plans were delayed indefinitely by the Nightkin invasion. Although many of the followers of Jason Bright were killed and an even higher number of feral ghouls also perished, there is still a horde of ferals wandering around inside and outside the facility. We can't be sure exactly when the ghouls made this facility their home, but the test rockets are powered by a nuclear fuel, and the ferals were likely attracted here for that reason alone. Nearly every single feral ghoul here is the lowest level variant, with only 1 glowing ghoul in the whole bunch, making for a very unique composition compared to every other ghoul population. The nuclear testing site at the very bottom of the map is a pre-war area with giant craters pitting the ground, scars from the pre-war days of the United States testing their nuclear bombs. The area is still fenced off to this day, but it hasn't kept a throng of ghouls, the 3rd biggest group in the Mojave, from gathering here. This area is strong evidence that some groups of ghouls are made up of wandering ghouls who just come across a source of radiation and decide to stay, adding more ghouls day by day. This location has the highest proportion of the deadliest variant, glowing ones, at 32% of the population, with 27% of them being the lesser reavers, and less than half of the population are the lowest threat variants. Just to the east is the next largest ghoul population, but this one is a lot different. Whereas the nuclear testing site has a bunch of common variants, and it's older than the Great War itself, Camp Searchlight is a new radioactive area filled with NCR trooper ghouls. This small town had been an NCR base before a secret operation by the Legion unleashed pre-war nuclear material that was so incredibly radioactive, it felt like a blast of energy and killed many NCR personnel and ghoulified the rest. I actually decided to count the non-feral ghouls here in the overall total because all of them are immediately and only hostile to anyone but other ghouls. The only real difference between them and their feral brethren is that they still have the wherewithal to use their weapons. Still, we know which ghouls come from this newly irradiated spot since they all wear NCR trooper uniforms, and at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any mixing between them and the ghouls at the nearby testing site. It would be interesting to see if in the future, more ghouls move towards the hazy green radioactive Camp Searchlight, or the ghoul troopers will join the larger group near the testing site. As it stands, 77% of the ghouls are normal troopers, with 23% glowing. The most northeastern location for ghouls is around a feature ominously called the Devil's Throat. One would think that they'd be found in the throat, because someone has dumped an impressive amount of radioactive waste down there, but all the ghouls are found outside of the throat to the southeast. They might be attracted to the radiation, but unable to get much closer because the bottom of the throat is claimed by centaurs, hideously mutated FEV creatures that may be fending off any feral that gets too close. 69% of the ghouls here are the more powerful Reaver type, and the rest being weak variants. The last 3 locations with the smallest number of ghouls are the Mesquite Mountain Crater area, the New Vegas Sewers, and the Train Tunnel, and those last 2 I find the most interesting. The ghouls found at the Mesquite Mountain Crater are often the first ghouls encountered by a new player since they are just past Prim on the west side of the road. While most of the ghouls here are base level ghouls and roamers, a small group that is about 38% of the total population are Reavers that only stay up near the crater, which is the radioactive hotspot. This almost makes it seem like the more dangerous Reaver types are able to intimidate the weaker ones and claim the more desirable spots in the crater. The sewers of New Vegas are interesting because some of the tunnels have been claimed by wasters who can't get into New Vegas proper, and a whole other section of the sewers is infested with rats and a small population of ghouls. While there are some radioactive spots due to a buildup of refuse in some areas, I don't think that is why the ghouls are here. I think this could be a case of ghouls seeking shelter from the elements, similar to what we observe in Fallout 3. The train tunnel seems similar since the tunnel is a security risk for the boomers in Nellis since it bypasses their watchmen who can call in blistering artillery barrages on any unfortunate soul who decides to come too close. I don't think that the boomers put the feral ghouls here. Rather, I think they were likely always there and the boomers kept them as additional security when locking them up. To the absolute delight of no one except Josh Sawyer himself, the second most common creature stands at 118 blasted individuals across much of the map. It is the game-wrecking Cazador, a giant genetically engineered tarantula hawk who only cares about finding something alive and f***ing it up. What is interesting about their distribution is that they are very heavily concentrated in the northwest, sticking generally to mountains and canyon areas. There are a couple spots in the east where Cazadors can be found, and in these cases, they are still mostly around cliffs or rocky terrain, except for one interesting place, but we'll get to that in a second. They are completely absent in the south, because encountering one of these early in the game while doing the famous loop would be a showstopper. We have an interesting situation where the 2 largest populations of Cazadors are tied in a classic game of East versus West, Bear versus Bull. A large area that covers Calville Bay, the counterfeit Cap Shack, and an area west of Bitter Springs has become absolutely infested with roaming Cazadors and their nests. Almost as far west as you can go in the northern part of the map, there's an unnamed canyon that can go missed by many because there is nothing of true import here, although it does give a shortcut from Red Rock Canyon, where the Great Khans live, to Jacobstown. Otherwise, one must go around the mountains to follow a road in the north. As you have likely noticed by now though, it's not a great shortcut because it is infested with Cazadors. If you manage to hike up the canyon crying and pissing yourself the whole way, there will be a number of human victims and even a dead super mutant. There's also one more unmistakable sign that you are in a bad place. Cazadors build nests, and these large, easy to spot nests are built on cliffs, buildings, and sometimes the ground, in a number of places across the map shown by the circles here. But since we're in this canyon, if we take a look at this population, a full third of the Cazadors here are the young variant, with the rest being full-grown adult Satan bugs, a proportion that is quite common as we will see. Due to the confines of the canyon and the sheer number of Cazadors, this one would actually be my pick for the most dangerous Cazador location. Just to the south is another group, although the population is a lot smaller, and it has claimed another small slot canyon. This one connects Red Rock Canyon to the lake at Spring Mountain Ranch State Park. This population skews younger, with 56% of them being young, and notably there are no nests. One of the things I find most interesting about these 2 populations is that they live in canyons that connect directly to the Great Khan's stronghold, and yet they apparently have no problem with these Cazadors. I would imagine that having 2 very large populations of Cazadors, one of them being the biggest in the whole game, living in canyons that empty directly into the Great Khan's community would have caused issues at some point. But we don't hear a peep about Cazadors from any of the Khans. Jumping back to the east, With this giant population of Cazadors, they are spread over a much wider area and have nests in several spots. 42% of the Cazadors are young, while the other 58% are normal type. Normal type? What? Is this Pokemon? Why did I say that? 58% are the base variant. There are two interesting things I want to point out here. The first is that this population essentially swarms the Bitter Springs camp and stands in the way of free movement from the rest of the Mojave and this arm, which connects to Bitter Springs, Camp Guardian, and Ranger Station Bravo. There should be some level of traffic, but there is not a peep about the winged demon spawn that crawls all over the one land route to these remote NCR camps. The second discovery is best illustrated by the Cazador population that swarms around the tribal village location and nearby Repconn makeshift camp. A healthy population of 14 Cazadors, 43% of which are young types, have invaded this area, blocking off the road that leads from Good Springs to New Vegas directly north, and also seemingly eating the dead bodies of both tribals that were mercilessly burned by a sadistic group of raiders called Fiends, and the Fiends themselves, who had been killed by a small group of Great Khans who were being paid to help Benny ambush us, the courier, to kick off the game's events. Although these Cazadors functionally don't do much except block the northern route to New Vegas, this is the fourth population that is directly adjacent to a Great Khan location, or really a former location. Although this was a temporary and small location, as this Khan group moved through with Benny, this plus the two populations right next to Red Rock Canyon and the huge population that are just outside Bitter Springs, which used to be the main Great Khan community. Is there a connection between Great Khans and these little shitheads? The Silver Peak mine is in the northwest, part of this Cazador hotspot if you will, but these Cazadors are tucked away inside the mine with no clues on the outside what kind of a nasty surprise you're about to walk into. Although the mine doesn't have the most Cazadors, the pretty cramped confines of the cave make the fight a lot more difficult, and 50% of the Cazadors are full-size adults. The real difficulty here though is that after you have killed all the Cazadors and reached the end of the rather small mine, the legendary Cazador itself will rear its ugly head and attack along with a small group of Cazadors. Although it's worth noting that the legendary is so large, it struggles to attack you if you're standing up on this ledge. So honestly, the fight isn't that hard. There are no nests, and it seems the Cazadors enter by crawling through some cracks in the cave ceiling, so this place has the potential to be a good hive. Two smaller populations are not too far from each other, one at the small brewer's bootlegging shack, and one just east of Vault 22. The swarms around the shack have nests on the shack in the nearby cliffs with a 50-50 split of young and adult. The group close to Vault 22 is definitely one of the oddest. They're not near any rocks, structures, nests, or really anything of note. So it isn't clear why they are swarming this location, but they are almost all young Cazadors at 83%. Although there are two more locations that are interesting to look at in their own ways, I think we've observed enough to make an interesting point. Almost every time there's a group of Cazadors around nests, there are more adults than young, or at least a 50-50 split. In contrast, groups without nests pretty consistently have more young Cazadors than groups near nests, perhaps meaning that once hatched and fully formed, young Cazadors are essentially kicked out and they are forced to find a new place to live or die trying. At any rate, two locations in the east with small populations are relatively close to each other, with one being the Cazador nest, which is not even a nest. The only one place named after Cazadors can't even name itself right. All that's here is a shallow cave that a bunch of Cazadors swarm around. Maybe they will build a nest, but there's none here right now. Again, we have mostly young Cazadors at 86%, which goes right along with our previous observations and bolsters our theory. Another interesting tidbit about this location is that in other language versions of New Vegas, this location is called the Mole Rat Nest. So apparently this area was originally intended to have mole rats and not Cazadors. Or did the Cazadors eat all the mole rats? The final location, the Southern Nevada Wind Farm, is an interesting location with a bunch of somewhat older-fashioned windmills that in the pre-war helped supply electricity. Amongst these windmills, though, is a fluttering group of death bugs that have a real attraction to this specific spot. I would once again like to point out that, in line with our theory, this nestless location is 100% young Cazadors, not an adult in sight. Either the Cazadors here think these windmills will make for great nesting, or they are attracted to the spinning blades. I could almost see the Cazadors being attracted to the spinning windmill blades because it could be somewhat similar to the rapid fluttering of Cazador wings, but this is simply a theory. That about does it for New Vegas's most annoying creature, but there's still one more thing. Looking at the population, these small circles are nests, and although the east side has more nests, the population on the west side is much larger, with many different groups and the legendary Cazador as well. This could be evidence that the big mountain research facility that we explore in the Old World Blues DLC is west of New Vegas. The most popular theories about its location already place it there, but it would make sense that when the Cazadors escaped and found the New Vegas area, they would establish populations as they expanded, and the larger and more numerous groups in the west could indicate that this is the direction they came from. How about this for a little bit of whiplash? Do you know the third most populous creature in the Mojave? We go from murder bees to the relatively docile bighorner. This large desert sheep type creature is not that much of a threat, except to the lowest level characters. However, they are tough enough to be found all over the Mojave, and can even be domesticated to a certain level, which no doubt helps boost their numbers. Good Springs is usually the first place the player encounters bighorners, completely docile and mostly penned up. Similarly, a small domesticated population is in Jacobstown, being raised by the super mutants in the northwest, which their economy relies on. And there are 9 poor bighorners starving to death in a former ranch whose former owners ghoulified when they visited the nearby Camp Searchlight during its radioactive miracle. Overall though, if we exclude the farms, bighorners can still be found in many parts of the map, although they do show a preference for certain environments. They are often found near sources of water, or, what certainly at least is part water. Given the rarity of clean water, bighorners seem just fine congregating around the green radioactive sludge pools and seem to maintain big healthy herds. If they are not around some sources of water, they are consistently found in mountains or just at the base of them, with perhaps the best example being the numerous small herds all around the mountainous area in the northwest. The largest group appears to be several herds that are roaming around a lowland area near the Snyder Prospector Camp, a surprisingly diverse area that may attract many different kinds of animals because of the many pools of radioactive sludge. Think of a watering hole in the savannah where many creatures are forced to come together for water, only everything's deadly and mutated. Oh, and you have to chew the water rather than drink it. Bighorners can come in 3 varieties. Calves, which are the youngest, just a plainly named bighorner, which could be adolescent males or full-grown females, and bulls, which are the largest and most dangerous variant. In this area, 41% are normal bighorners, 35% are calves, which is a very healthy number of young, and 24% are bulls. Although this area doesn't seem like it has much to offer such a large population, I would make a guess that they migrate to this area to get water when needed. Bighorners are not too hard to deal with, but I will call this the most dangerous bighorner location just because of the sheer numbers. The second largest population is in a location that almost couldn't be more different and still be in the Mojave. Spring Mountain Ranch State Park is a small oasis tucked away against the mountains that has actual green vegetation and is one of the only sources of clear, almost non-irradiated water, which just sounds disgusting. This population has the highest percentage of calves at 37% and normal bighorners at 44%, with only a few bulls. It would seem as though this area would be a great place for a large population, with perhaps the only obstacle being some of the very dangerous nearby populations of Cazadors and potentially humans who would hunt them. Now, the area that I find most fascinating is up in the northwest, in the mountains where Jacobstown is nestled. There are many small groups of bighorners that cover a large area, and they have all been grouped together as one mega group. This collection of smaller groups, usually around 3, sometimes more, is super interesting because the population breakdown here is 93% bulls. Nearly every single bighorner up here is a bull, with only a couple normal ones, which again, we don't know if that means they are female or just young males. What makes this so cool is that male desert bighorn sheep, which don't look like bighorners but live in a similarly dry and arid environment, will spend a good portion of the year separate from the herd of females and calves to live in little bachelor groups in the mountains. That is exactly the behavior we see here in New Vegas's most mountainous area, and I love that attention to detail that most people would never even notice. Nipton is an unforgettable town not because anyone could go gamble and whore it up, that can happen nearly anywhere in the New Vegas region, but because when the player encounters the town for the very first time, everyone is massacred except for 2 lucky guys, and the Legion is standing there just all proud of themselves. However, just north of the town turned graveyard and just east of the town are the 4th and 5th largest populations of bighorners. The group east is interesting because it seems to be 2 distinct groups, one down near some watering holes, and the other up in the small mountains which has no calves at all, just a small population of bulls and a bunch of normal bighorners. The group down below though has 30% calves, which is the normal amount for all these lowland populations. The group to the north has a very similar composition, although it notably doesn't have a single bull. These bighorners are dangerously close to a group of centaurs and some super mutants just to the north, and there is a nearby coyote den that I am sure have their sights set on this herd. The last and smallest group that isn't domesticated is east of the grab and go rest stop, once again near some sludge pools with a very standard population breakdown. The 4th most populous creature in the whole game is the long-standing Radscorpion. And I'm also going to look at bark scorpions while we're here because they are often found together or very close by. There are approximately 85 Radscorpions found across the Mojave, colored in pink, and less than half of that number of bark scorpions calling the Mojave their home, shown in orange. Zoomed all the way out, it is very clear that they inhabit almost exclusively the southern and middle parts of the map, with exceptionally few and tiny exceptions in the north. Given that bark scorpions are low-level enemies and Radscorpions range from low to middle range threats, their concentration in the south makes sense since this is part of the early New Vegas loop. The single largest group of Radscorpions in the whole game is in the southwest corner, where they have claimed half of an old dry lake bed and even dug the only scorpion burrow that we can explore in the entire game. Down in the burrow is one of only 2 Radscorpion queens in the whole game, and the whole lake area is crawling in small, normal, and giant kinds of Radscorpions. Small Radscorpions are the most numerous at 42%, while giant and normal lag behind at 32 and 22 respectively, although no giant Radscorpions are found in the burrow, presumably because they're too big to fit inside that tiny hole. There are a few human remains down in the burrow, apparently offerings to the humongous queen who is possibly trapped down here because of her huge size. This is probably the most dangerous group because of the high number of Radscorpions and the very strong queen down in the burrow. The other largest populations are not too far away, with the 3rd largest group at the Nipton rest stop and higher up in the Mesquite Mountains campsite, which I want to add is the only time we see Radscorpions in the mountains. And the other location is the Camp Searchlight Airport, which has almost nothing to offer a wandering courier except a bunch of Radscorpions. While the campsite population is likely an offshoot of the Scorpion Burrow because they are so close, it is mostly made up of the more dangerous giant Radscorpion, but the airport group is actually mostly small scorpions, making up 67% of the population. Going north, the populations thin out, with a medium-sized group of mostly giant Radscorpions calling the mountains between Good Springs and Quarry Junction their home. Their only job is to help block the courier from traveling north from Good Springs, and they seem pretty good at it because we can see a number of human victims. Really, the 2 most interesting populations are the centrally located group in the well-named Scorpion Gulch and the population in the radioactive Camp Searchlight. Scorpion Gulch is interesting because the Radscorpions live side by side with a very large population of bark scorpions. In fact, the Gulch has the 2nd highest population of bark scorpions in the entire game. Scorpions in the real world are pretty solitary creatures, and since they can barely tolerate members of their own species, it is rather incredible that they would be just fine living alongside an entirely other species that they are competing with for resources. It's not clear what draws all the scorpions to this area. It is quite protected because of the cliffs and canyon walls. However, I think the faraway population at Camp Searchlight is actually the most interesting. The camp has the only other Radscorpion queen in the game, located in the fire station, which is the epicenter of the radiation leak. She is so big, she can barely fit inside this place, and realistically the only way she could get inside is if someone opened one of these giant garage doors and shut her in. However, I think it's more likely that some small scorpions had been living inside of the building, and they mutated from the radiation, growing to epic proportions. Proportions that are far too large for the space they are found in. This may be the case for this whole population actually, as there are no small Radscorpions, possibly because the population is so new, they haven't had time to start producing the new Radscorpion generations. Interestingly, 4 of the Radscorpions will only spawn if one meets Private Edwards, who is the only non-hostile NCR ghoul who refuses to leave the house so he can be found in because Radscorpions give him the ick. Leaving the house will put us face to face with a few giant Radscorpions that need to be killed to let Private Edwards leave safely. All other Radscorpion populations are very small, sometimes consisting of only one lonely Radscorpion with no place to call home and no place to rest. We talked about bark scorpions infesting Scorpion Gulch, which is probably their most dangerous group, but their biggest population is actually just nearby in the stormy area known as Hidden Valley. Since they are the only critters to be found here, it's possible that the frequent sandstorms that whip up due to the still functioning pre-war technology that makes sandstorms to obscure the military bunkers here make it so only the bark scorpions can survive. The only other substantial group is in Nipton, where a few have now claimed the trailer park since the Legion freed up a bunch of real estate, but also because of one specific house whose owner had booby-trapped it to Adam and back. One of the many traps is a tripwire that releases a cage of bark scorpions who immediately set on the player in the extremely cramped space of the home. The only other interesting population is all the way up near New Vegas, and these 4 are yet another group trapped in a building. The El Rey Motel is a stone's toss away from the NCR's biggest base, Camp McCarran, and is filled with junkies and chem addicts, poor souls that have nowhere to go and nothing to live for except for the next hit of jet. In one of the rooms, someone shoved 4 bark scorpions into a tiny motel room, and this poor old chap here has become scorpion food. A note called Threatening Note speaks of an unpaid debt, making this appear to be a very creative murder of a debtor. Did anyone tell him that they could just shoot him or something? That had to be easier than hauling 4 dog-sized venomous scorpions into a motel room. The next most populous creature is a subspecies of an iconic New Vegas animal, the awkwardly bipedal fire gecko. Fire geckos are the strongest of 3 kinds that can be found, and so it's unusual that the strongest variant is actually the most numerous. Their distribution is pretty strange. Most are found in the southeast, a substantial number in the northwest, and then a small little group in the northeast. Let's not start with the highest populations like normal, rather where we know fire geckos first mutated. Fire Root Cavern is said by the New Vegas Game Guide to be the birthplace of fire geckos, and this strangely lush cave is inhabited by a number of them, most notable of which is the large and in charge legendary fire gecko. 18% of the population are young geckos, which is quite low, with the rest being normal. This is probably the most dangerous of all the fire gecko locations because of the cramped cave and the presence of the legendary. Just north of the apparent genesis point of all fire geckos are a number of large, medium, and small groups, slotting in between all the heavily defended NCR and Legion bases and camps. A small group lives right on the edge of a cliff near the cliffside prospector camp, with 1/3 of the population being young geckos. Another quite large group is across the street from the Snyder prospector camp, with a different breakdown of around 2/3 being young and 1/3 being adult fire geckos. These 2 groups may be related to a central group between them that exists around the now collapsed Lucky Jim mine, which has about 25% of the population being young fire geckos. These 3 groups constitute the largest group of fire geckos that are found on the surface under the blazing Mojave sun, something that they seem to tolerate but don't necessarily thrive in. There are a couple other small populations, one dangerously close to the Cazadors at the Southern Nevada wind farm, and one at the end of a little canyon in the northeast, the most isolated population of them all, and they are only a stone's toss away from a cave full of ferocious Nightstalkers. Near the middle of the map, we have 2 large groups found underneath Vault 19, this group having tunneled through the bottom floor of the vault in a very impressive feat of strength. The original vault dwellers are long gone, their fates unknown, but the new occupiers of the vault, which are a group of escaped NCR convicts known as powder gangers, have locked doors and laid down mines to keep the fire geckos from invading the rest of the vault. The caverns below, however, house the largest group of fire geckos in the entire region, even though there is no clear entrance or exit to this cave system. They also share it with a very small population of Nightstalkers and have apparent turf wars with casualties on both sides. It is unclear why fire geckos are so interested in this area. It does have unique geology compared to any of the other caves, and they are referred to as sulfur caves, so perhaps the connection between fire and sulfur is why we can find them here. This population is very interesting because it is completely composed of adult fire geckos, not a single young one among them. Nearby Vault 19 is the Nopa Cave, just a little bit to the north. It has geology similar to the sulfur caves, although there is no observable connection between the two. Interestingly, this one has 60% young fire geckos and has a number of human remains, and even a dead super mutant. Golden geckos are less common than fire geckos, while also being a little weaker, although it is obvious that the two species aren't overly hostile to each other because there is a small population of golden geckos living in a radioactive crater that is just outside one of the Fire Root Cavern exits. The best way to predict whether golden geckos will be in a given area is whether or not nuclear waste is found nearby. I already mentioned the radioactive Cottonwood Crater that has one unfortunate wasteland victim, but there are only 4 adult geckos here. When one thinks of radiation, Camp Searchlight is certainly one of the first to come to mind, and yes, there is a lonely pair of golden geckos chilling in a church basement. Another medium-sized population can be found at Clark Field and is the only creature to be found here, as it's an old nuclear storage site, and around a third of the geckos here are young ones. The ghoul-infested Vault 34 has a medium population of golden geckos crawling all over the outside, which interestingly has piles of nuclear waste barrels kind of all over the place. This will be why the golden geckos are here, with around 27% of the population being young geckos, and if an insane number of ghouls weren't inside of the vault, the geckos likely would have expanded there too, although we can see the remains of a gecko who tried to do exactly that. It didn't end well. Really, the most impressive area in terms of golden geckos is a very easy to miss location called Crescent Canyon, hiding behind the Radscorpion infested lake bed in the southwest part of the map. This canyon used to have a bridge going over it and was used as a dumping ground for large trash and waste because jerks never change. Some of that waste was nuclear in nature because of course it was, and the golden gecko just eats that stuff up. Literally, they are described in Fallout 2 as consuming nuclear waste. At any rate, this massive population here lives inside the canyon and at the eastern and western entrances, usually bumping up against the Radscorpions and mole rats nearby, so it's not really that strange to see a goofy looking gecko just running like Forrest Gump across the desert. This is the most diverse group by far, with 13% being young geckos, 29% being young hunters, and a full third being adult hunters, with the rest being normal adult golden geckos. Due to the large population and more difficult hunter variants, that makes this the most dangerous of all the golden gecko locations. And finally, we come to the least common and lowest threat gecko type in the entire game, the humble gecko. Incredibly, they can only be found in one stretch of land directly south of Good Springs in the hills, on the side of a mountain where they have a pile of dead human victims, chasing a rad roach down the street, and starting a beef with some of the bloatflies across the road near all the sludge puddles. Most of the population consists of young geckos, with young and young hunters accounting for 62%, normal geckos at 25%, and the most dangerous variant of all, gecko hunters, only accounting for 13%. Maybe their relative weakness compared to most other wasteland creatures means that they have a very limited area in which they can survive. Just behind fire geckos in 6th place, can you guess what it is? I'll give you a hint. It's lean, it's green, it's ready to show off its moves. It is the giant mantis. Alright, generally these guys aren't that exciting or interesting, but they got their start in Vault 22 and have done quite well for themselves, expanding into the Mojave. What I think is really cool is looking at the map, it seems very clear that the mantises moved south along the mountains and canyons that hem the west side of the map in, getting fewer in number as they go south, which is a pattern I would kind of expect. The funny thing about this though, is that their green, vegetated, lush Vault 22 where they came from is not where the most mantises can be found. That honor goes to the one single location, not on the west side of the map, in Vault 11. How did they get here? Why do they like this place so much? It's hard to explain either way, but every mantis here is a full adult. There are absolutely no nymphs. Mantises can be found in many rooms, behind closed doors with seemingly no prey except for the large population of giant rats that also claim Vault 11. I don't know how long this population can sustain itself with no nymphs and smack dab in the middle of the map, isolated from other mantis populations, but I'm no giant mantis, so what do I know? A large population covers a wide area in the mountains near Jacobstown, which makes sense given how close it is to Vault 22, and 27% of the mantises are nymphs. A similarly sized group has made their home in the vegetated Spring Mountain Ranch Park, where they live alongside bighorners apparently just fine, but interestingly there are no nymphs here at all, although it seems like a really great place for a thriving population. 2 tiny populations are found farther south, a small group in the Good Spring School, which has been abandoned for who knows how long, and are 100% young nymphs who seem to have hatched just recently from this egg sac. A similar situation is down south in the Nevada Highway Patrol Station, but these mantis nymphs were placed here on purpose by the Gecko raiders that have claimed this location, locking in some poor waster to be eaten alive by them. This is kind of funny though, because nymphs are one of the only creatures that we can kill just by walking on them. At number 7, so still in the top 10 of most numerous New Vegas creatures, we have arguably the most famous and feared Fallout creature of them all, the relentless Deathclaw. At a total population of 79 specimens, unlike most of the other creatures we have looked at, Deathclaws are found in actually very few locations, really only 3 in the entirety of the New Vegas region. The premier location that most seasoned players associate with Deathclaws is Quarry Junction, a large NCR-operated quarry that is centrally located and not that far away from the starting location of Good Springs. This Deathclaw infestation that pushed out the quarry workers completely shut down all travel along the highway. Deathclaws aren't just in the quarry, they are all around it. Packs of Deathclaws prowl much of the area outside of the quarry to the north and east, often bumping up against nearby groups like Powder Gangers near Vault 19. The number of Deathclaws here blocking passage of a low-level, bushy-tailed courier fresh out of their grave in Good Springs is frankly ridiculous. No other animal has as many creatures in a similarly sized area in the entire game. And it's pretty crazy to think that one of the most dangerous creatures in the whole game also has the most concentrated population in the game. This location has all the trappings of a healthy and thriving group. A loving Deathclaw mother, a stern but fair alpha male Deathclaw, several cute little babies comprising about 9% of the population, a robust new generation of youths at 18%, with the remaining 68% of Deathclaws being strong, boring adults. This is hands down the healthiest group in the region, and unless something is done about them, I see no reason for them not to expand and become an even bigger problem. What is one of the most peculiar things about this Deathclaw population is that they only very recently moved into the quarry, after operations had been paused because of the prison breakout at the nearby NCR Correctional Facility. The workers figure that the pause in work and sudden silence as the machinery was temporarily parked enticed a group of Deathclaws to move in and take over. I have to wonder though, where did this many Deathclaws come from? Certainly such a massive group of Deathclaws would have been noticed and created quite a stir among the inhabitants of the region, but the little dialogue that speaks directly to the Deathclaws' sudden and unexpected invasion doesn't give us much to go off of. The only other Deathclaw population that is comparable to the massive group at Quarry Junction is to the south in a dark cave known as Dead Wind Cavern. That name is subtly ominous, and it should be, because once you enter this cave, you will have to face down 18 Deathclaws up close and personal with little space for retreat. What makes this population comparable to the Quarry Junction one is that it's the only other location where we have a mother Deathclaw, and it is the only location with the most powerful Deathclaw of them all, the legendary Deathclaw, which has the same model as the alpha male Deathclaw seen at Quarry Junction, and therefore could very well be this location's alpha male. It has a very comparable population breakdown as well, with 22% young and 67% adult, but noticeably no baby Deathclaws like at Quarry Junction, despite having a mother Deathclaw. This is definitely the most dangerous Deathclaw location. It may not have the most, but it has far too many to feel comfortable fighting in this cave. Two distinct groups of Deathclaws are pretty close to one another and make up the only Deathclaw group in the northeast, making passage into this area difficult. Close to the train tunnel that the boomers have locked up and booby-trapped is a population of normal Deathclaws, and I only say it that way because just south at the Gypsum train yard is a group of blind Deathclaws. Yes, it's not clear how or why this population of Deathclaws went blind, whether it could be blamed on external factors or some sort of unfortunate mutation, but it almost doesn't seem to matter all that much because these Deathclaws are just as deadly as any other. The train tunnel population has more young Deathclaws, and the Gypsum train yard population is a number of adult and baby Deathclaws, although the babies aren't labeled as much. They have the same exact appearance as the babies at Quarry Junction though. For whatever reason, there is a single, solitary blind Deathclaw that can be found in a small shortcut through the mountains near the Deadwind Cavern called the Prim Pass. Just one lonely Deathclaw calls this place home and will often be found fighting or having recently killed a raider that spawns here as well. Killing the Deathclaw won't cause it to ever respawn, but why is there a blind Deathclaw here? Did it come from the population to the north? Why is it alone? So many questions and no clear answers. Number 8 on this list is a creature that is very regional and can only survive in very specific environments, notably of the marine type. The strangely anthropomorphic Lake Lurk is a decently strong creature that is found all along the Colorado River below the dam and Lake Mead above it, with the very curious exception of one location, all the way in the west in the mountains near Jacobstown. Lake Lurks are found exclusively in and around the waters in the east. Let's start in the southeast part of the map, where Lake Lurks hold the distinction of being the most southeasterly creature group in the whole game. Two substantial populations, one being tied for first place, are found in approximately the same spot, just on opposite sides of the river, and they could very well be the same population. However, we never see Lake Lurks cross the river, so we can't be 100% sure. The biggest group is an unmarked location that players never find because there isn't much here except for a whole group of pissed off fish turtle men things. Multiple victims can be found in a shallow grave nearby, but given that there is no easy access to this area due to the sheer rock cliffs on the east side, it is totally reasonable that these victims were killed on the western shores and then dragged across the river to this cave. Lake Lurks also have one single variant, and there is only one of that variant in the entire game, the Lake Lurk King, which does not live with this group. The opposite bank is fewer in number and terrorizes an old river vacation spot without much else going on. There are only a handful of Lake Lurks in the river moving north towards the dam, although a pair can be found on the shore east of the Tachatacut mine, and finally we start seeing some other signs of Lake Lurks, namely some egg clutches in a small alcove a little farther north. 3 nests can be found protected by 4 Lake Lurks. Lake Mead has a very healthy population of Lake Lurks with small groups found all over, like the floating scavenger platform, the fisherman's shack, and Boulder Beach campground. I showed these as isolated groups simply because we never actually see the Lake Lurks swim in the water, so they are functionally isolated, although there is really no reason for them to be. The most interesting group is almost as far north and east as you can go on the map, in the Camp Guardian Cave. One entrance to this cave had a number of NCR soldiers set up a small camp nearby, and one night, a throng of Lake Lurks would emerge from the cave and drag the NCR soldiers screaming into the cave depths, killing all but one. This cave system is quite vast and connects to an underwater outlet into Lake Mead, so it is understandable how and why the Lake Lurks live here. This is where the only Lake Lurk King in the whole game lives, who almost functions like a legendary Lake Lurk, and there are many clutches of eggs to be found here as well. Thanks to the hospitality of the NCR, the Lake Lurks and their soon-to-hatch babies should have plenty to eat, with more fresh victims found here than any other creature location. This is hands down the most dangerous area because of the sheer number of Lake Lurks and the presence of the much stronger King. The lone population, miles and miles away across blistering desert, and the most populated human settlement in the entire region is a watery cave in the mountains that somehow is host to the 4th largest group of Lake Lurks. Multiple victims can be found in the Ruby Hill mine, including a Jackal Raider and a super mutant, but it really remains a mystery why Lake Lurks are even here. Did they really make the trek all the way across the map? And if so, why? And also how? Maybe when? Were Lake Lurks purposefully or accidentally brought here, perhaps by someone transporting some of their eggs? I would love to hear some of your theories. 9th place, but only barely so, was the only other creature in the region that was made by the unhinged brains at Big Mountain through genetic manipulation. This unholy combination of coyote and rattlesnake DNA is a surprisingly quick and deadly foe, particularly in numbers. This genetic abomination outcompetes its genetic cousin, the coyote, quite handily and can be found in nearly every corner of the map. They are exclusively found in or just on the outside of the caves that they call home, rather than most other creatures that can be found roaming the surface in at least some cases. The largest population lives in the southern part of the map in a cave just south of the Insta-Death Cave with the legendary Deathclaw. I would imagine a strong population would be needed to keep any wandering Deathclaws from entering the cave, and this population is over 50% young ones, so an overall very young group. Killing all the Nightstalkers here will result in some Deathclaws spawning at the cave opening after a few days. The two northern corners each are tied for the second largest population, but let's examine the Charleston Cave that is up in the mountains above Jacobstown. The player often finds this location because of quests tied to helping the Nightkin in Jacobstown, since it has been observed that some Nightstalkers nearby are apparently turning invisible just like the Nightkin. That makes this one of the most difficult Nightstalker locations to deal with. It has a lot of them, and they are invisible, as if they are using stealth boys, in a dark and cramped cave. Making it to the end, it's discovered that a Nightkin has fallen victim to the Nightstalkers and was drugged into the back of their cave, where they found the Nightkin's stealth boy and decided it would make a nice chew toy. This has somehow transferred the stealth boy's cloaking ability to the Nightstalkers, who, if this issue was not properly addressed, would probably become the most effective predators in the whole Mojave. A quick, coordinated pack of vicious animals is difficult enough to fend off, but make them invisible, and good luck. This population is exclusively adult, with at least 4 human or humanoid victims found in their territory. I am marking this as the most lethal Nightstalker location because of the high number, as well as being invisible in an already dark and claustrophobic cave. On the opposite side of the map, all the way to the east, is a special cave though, the Bloodborne Cave, that sits amongst populations of similarly dangerous creatures. This one is special though because amongst the numerous Nightstalkers, of which only 29% are young, this is where the singular legendary Nightstalker can be found, with the remains of at least 7 human victims, making it the bloodiest of all the Nightstalker locations. Bloodborne Cave indeed. Killing all the Nightstalkers here can actually make Cazadors spawn at the cave entrance after some time. Very nearby, so close in fact I have a hard time believing it's a totally separate population, is a small group that has broken into a Great Khan supply cave above Bitter Springs. It is a very nasty surprise, but the entire population are young Nightstalkers that are likely an exploration party that stumbled upon some yummy old Khan supplies. Since it was already mentioned, let's just quickly mention the small population that exists in contention with the fire geckos in the sulfur caves below Vault 19. There are only 7 adult Nightstalkers, and even though they have killed 1 fire gecko, they have also lost a member in this underground turf war, and I have a hard time believing that such a small population can overcome such a large force of fire geckos, even with how vicious Nightstalkers are, so I don't expect this population to displace the geckos anytime soon. The final location of Nightstalkers is actually really close to the early game areas, but once again it's a cave at the top of some mountains that is very easy to miss. The Nightstalkers never wander too far, so they are not an issue for low-level couriers, but this group, which is 2/3 young Nightstalkers, is unique because it has a den mother, a uniquely strong variant that will frenzy if her babies are threatened. Unlike Cazadors, which seem to show a preference for the western part of the map, Nightstalkers, which we also know came from Big Mountain, show no such population concentration, so there is no clear or really even probable migration pattern that we could propose based on where we find their populations. And here we are at 10th place, the 10th most common creature in the entire game, and what do you suppose it is? We have talked about nearly all of the most dangerous creatures, and some rather mundane ones as well, and this, well, it's a bit more mundane. Giant rats can be an issue in certain locations. They are usually found in large groups, with very few exceptions. By far the biggest location is the least surprising of all, because a giant group is found in the sewers underneath New Vegas. They are the most common creature here, found in nearly every part that isn't inhabited by humans and are immediately hostile to any intruders. 29% of the rats here are pups, showing a strong young generation, with the rest being adult giant rats, with two very special ones that are simply called unnaturally large-sized rodents. These are the strongest variants that can be found here and are found in a room with a deceased wastelander named Sweet Jill, who they presumably killed. Sewers make sense for rats, but how about an old abandoned vault? Vault 11, which has a huge population of giant mantises, also has a huge number of giant rats, although not quite as big as the mantis population. Still though, this is the second largest population, although it's not entirely clear what they eat or how they sustain themselves in this relatively isolated vault. But just like how the entire mantis population here was comprised of adults, there are no giant rat pups. The Brockflower Cave is the most southerly location they can be found at and is special for a few reasons. While it has the third largest population, the giant rats in this cave are exceptionally dangerous, more so than any of the others. If one has the Wild Wasteland perk chosen at the beginning of the game, all the giant rats here will instead be rodents of unusual size, as an Easter egg referencing the Princess Bride novel and movie, who, true to their name, are huge and exceptionally dangerous. It's not clear why the rats love this place. It has a bunch of old nuclear waste, which is good enough for me, but the cave also has a lot of brockflower growing just outside. So, is it plausible that they are here for that reason? I don't know. This is easily the most dangerous giant rat location because these are the strongest rats in the whole game. The last locations are exceptionally small groups. 3 are found rummaging inside the Bitter Springs recreational office, 3 hang out at the latrine for Camp Guardian, and possibly the most famous of the rats is running around Freeside being chased by a little kid in perpetuity. That is, unless a kind courier shoots the rat, at which point the young lad will thank us. Golden geckos take spot 11 and bark scorpions take spot 12, but since we discussed them in the context of similar creatures, that makes one of the most successful animals in all of nature lucky number 13. Giant ants have been subdivided because of some fiery differences between normal run-of-the-mill giant ants and their spicy relatives, the giant fire ants. They are never seen mixing or really that close together, but the giant ants outnumber fire ants with a population of 42 versus 23. Given how enormously successful ants are in nature, it's a small wonder we don't see more of them. Their distribution is quite spotty, even when counting the fire ants. The largest population of ants is in the southwest corner in the dry lake, where the Ivanpah racing track can be found. They have a colony under the dry lake, similar to the Radscorpions in the southern part of the lake, and cover a pretty large area. It's not uncommon to see the ants fighting some of the Radscorpions sometimes, and I always wondered how these jackal raiders nearby could set up shop in these ruins without being harassed by either the ants or the Radscorpions. 73% of this colony are worker ants, with the rest being soldier, which when compared to the real world is very disproportionate because most types of ants have 90 to 95% of the population as worker ants. Maybe all of the soldiers are up top and we have tons of worker ants down below, and that could account for it. It is interesting that this big dry lake can sustain the biggest population of giant ants along with the biggest population of Radscorpions, but I must ask, what is sustaining these populations? I guess travelers that enter from the Mojave outpost and go north to New Vegas, or heaven forbid, east towards Nipton, could be targets. A slightly smaller but similarly sized population is found smack dab in the middle of the Boomers base at Nellis Air Force Base, where a colony of giant ants tunneled into their generator building and cut the power. To complicate things even further, they have been munching on the stored munitions, meaning fighting with a flame or energy weapon will cause them to explode violently upon death. At first, there will only be a handful of worker ants, but upon restarting the generators, a squad of soldier ants will emerge from the nearby ant mound and attack, giving us an idea of how these colonies operate. This means quite a disproportionate population with 64% soldiers and the rest workers is observed. Well, until we wiped them out. The other ant populations are rather small. Around 7 can be found in a Great Khan supply cave north of Bitter Springs, likely being attracted to the supplies here, but most of the ants again are soldier ants at 57%. Very small populations are found in the Gypsum Train Yard office building, where they have burrowed into the building and are able to wander around safe from the Deathclaws outside, and the Basin Creek building, where they have a small group trying to claim the building from the large group of rad roaches just in the outskirts of New Vegas. The fire ants have a similarly large main population in the center of the map at the El Dorado Dry Lake. Ants seem to really like to make colonies in the dry lakes. This population is 33% soldiers with the rest workers, who wander around looking for anything to snack on, like a pack Brahmin that is found dead on a nearby road. The only other location with fire ants is not that far away, at the aptly named Ant Mound just south of Camp McCarran. This mound is the only ant burrow that we can enter and explore, and has a number of ants guarding the entrance and tending the only known ant queen in the whole game. We again see a very disproportionate population of 57% soldiers, and the ants here have been quite successful at finding humans to snack on, who can be found down in the mound. And if I had to pick one, this would be my pick for the most dangerous ant location. One of the most unmutated, successful, and native creatures to this part of the world are coyotes, which are mostly found in the southwest, the area dominated by low-threat creatures. Around the Good Springs Cave, Devil's Gullet, and the Yangtze Memorial, a number of coyotes are found doing, coyote things? Chasing roadrunners. 28% of the population are pups, with the rest being adults, which is going to be a very common breakdown for most of these groups. They definitely prey on unaware travelers, as several human victims can be found inside the Good Springs Cave. Killing all the coyotes in this cave will make Radscorpion spawn later, and this would be my pick for the most dangerous coyote location due to the sheer numbers. A bit farther south at the canyon wreckage, which serves as the entrance to the path that leads to the divide, coyotes have made their home in a shallow cave littered with bones. This population is distinct because it has a variant called the Pack Alpha that is regularly seen sitting atop a nearby hill, keeping an eye out for danger or prey. This group has the common population breakdown with 29% pups. One location is specifically named after coyotes, although there are no more here than at the canyon wreckage. The Coyote Den is a secluded, shallow cave with a number of coyotes, which notably includes a den mother, one of the only 2 observed, and this population has the exact same proportion of pups. The last 2 groups that are the smallest and most northerly are nearby the entrance to Cannibal Johnson's cave, and at the base of Guardian Peak. The Cannibal Johnson group has a den mother, even though it has the lowest pup population of any group at 17%. You've got to pump those numbers up, girl. This population appears to have been larger, but has taken some casualties because a few dead ones can be found inside the Cannibal Johnson's cave alongside mole rats and Nightstalkers. Finally, we get to a group of creatures that has been part of Fallout's identity since the first game: super mutants, Nightkin, and centaurs. Having been made by the Master years before the events of Fallout New Vegas, although they are all different, they often stick together because the rest of the wasteland freaking hates them, and they are all united in FEV. Nightkin prefer to be invisible by using stealth boys, and the stealth radiation has affected their brains, inducing paranoid schizophrenia. Centaurs are almost used as pets or attack dogs. They are an unholy combination of multiple organisms, which explains their ghastly appearance. Super mutants are kind of all over, although the largest groups are in easily defendable areas away from most humans, and Nightkin are a bit more centralized in the middle of the map with a few exceptions. Centaurs are the rarest and only found close by super mutant groups. Most super mutants live in Jacobstown, a settlement started by an old, friendly super mutant named Marcus in an old mountain resort far away from most humans. Nightkin are not only welcome here, but Marcus wants them to stay and is working with a human and ghoul scientist to help cure their stealth boy-induced mania. Not everything is peaceful at Jacobstown, and based on the player's actions, the Nightkin can storm off never to return. But with 14 super mutants and only 6 Nightkin, there is definitely a large population disparity between the two. Interestingly, on top of another mountain in the middle of the map called Black Mountain, which was a pre-war satellite array for military intelligence gathering, another group of super mutants and Nightkin have coalesced around a much less stable leader, Tabitha, who is a frenzied Nightkin. Just nearby at a radioactive crater is the smallest of all the centaur populations, with the only named centaur in the whole game, Mo, crawling around some dead Brotherhood Knights. This location would be my pick for the most dangerous FEV mutant location in the game. It's interesting that the Jacobstown and Black Mountain populations are quite comparable, with 13 super mutants and 8 Nightkin at Black Mountain if we count the 3 Nightkin that are found at the base of the mountain in a cave. This shows that there is a good disagreement amongst the super mutants and Nightkin relating to how they should live and what their place in the wasteland is. Those in Jacobstown are trying to integrate by creating a working town, trying to establish trade and diplomatic relations with other human groups like any other settlement. Black Mountain, under Tabitha, takes a much more adversarial stance, which is understandable because super mutants and Nightkin are treated very poorly. As a result, the player won't be attacked in Jacobstown, but when approaching Black Mountain, one friendly super mutant will give you a warning that humans are not accepted at Black Mountain, and going any further will result in hostilities. The rest of the super mutants are scattered, with most of them hostile, as they apparently are trying to scrape by in a hostile world. A small group of 3 live in the northeast close to the Devil's Throat, with one dead super mutant down at the bottom, with the second largest population of centaurs roaming the area. 2 super mutants can be found at Jackrabbit Springs, which is in the typically low-threat southwest area. This small group has decided to make these irradiated pools their home, along with a whole army of centaurs, this being their largest population in the whole game. One very notable super mutant lives among the humans in Westside, just north of New Vegas, helping protect from outside threats. This is interesting because the mutant known as Mean Son of a Bitch was captured and tortured by a group of people that hated super mutants, even cutting out his tongue, so I can barely understand a damn thing he says. Interestingly, more Nightkin can, or, well, could be found not at Black Mountain nor Jacobstown, but the Repconn test facility that is crawling with ghouls. A group led by a Nightkin called Davison has been staying at Jacobstown, but left after learning that the Repconn facility might contain stealth boys. A huge battle ensued between the invading Nightkin and the ghouls, and unfortunately for the Nightkin, the stealth boys that had at one point been at the Repconn building are long gone. A full 8 Nightkin are dead, leaving only around 5 left skulking in the basement. A Nightkin, possibly associated with Davison's group, will show up at the nearby town of Novak at night to kill Brahmin from the McBride herd. In a similar situation all the way to the northwest, a single Nightkin can be encountered near an empty pen at the Brooks Tumbleweed Ranch, where one will appear and ask the player if they would like to buy some Wind Brahmin. Refusing the Nightkin or arguing with him will make him hostile, but he will remain friendly if you cough up the caps for a penned up tumbleweed. Aha, Wind Brahmin, I get it now. I don't know why this location is abandoned, most are in this part of the map, but I doubt this Nightkin had anything to do with it. I do think it's interesting though, that there are no centaurs in Jacobstown, but I would imagine having them around would be an issue when trying to raise a herd of bighorners and entice human visitors and traders. Mole rats are another long-standing creature introduced in the first games, but their population is rather small in the New Vegas region, but the majority of mole rat colonies are in the low-threat south. That said, the largest population isn't actually in the south, but in the north, not far from Camp Gulch, sandwiched between Coyotes on the west, Cazadors on the east, and Deathclaws to the north. Wow, what a location! There are a lot of young mole rats called pups here at 44% of the population, and sadly one will often stray too far from the rest of the group and the entrance of their burrow and get killed by the nearby pack of coyotes. Down south where most mole rats live though, a large population is just south of the Mojave Drive-In. But once again, they are squished between packs of geckos and Radscorpions and are usually getting their butt kicked by these two groups. This group has a ton of pups at 63% of the population, making it that much easier to be hunted by surrounding creatures and also easier to deal with for a low-level courier who is often passing through this part of the map. A similarly sized population is near the incredibly dangerous caves with Nightstalkers and Deathclaws. Seriously, how do they choose where to live? These two populations are separated by a highway that again are usually getting their butts kicked by nearby legionnaires or caravan guards passing by, and this population is the oldest of the groups with only 38% being pups. The most interesting group, though, is a small population that is being farmed up near New Vegas. This mole rat ranch is run by some unknown person, or maybe not, I don't know, it actually looks kind of abandoned. But this operation has been completely wrecked by a mad Brahmin who came in and killed all the mole rats. I just want to know how you farm mole rats outside on normal ground. Can't they just burrow outside the enclosure? This whole thing was doomed from the start, even before some meat-eating Brahmin walked by. This is my pick for the most dangerous mole rat spot, but not because of the mole rats. Sometimes lone little mole rats can be found like not far from the Red Highwaymen or the Brockflower Cave, but hands down the best lone mole rat is up in Sloan. This mole rat has been tamed and named Snuffles the Mole Rat. He's kind of ugly, but very nice, and has a higher intelligence than Caesar. But then again, which of us doesn't? Bloatflies are nasty, weak, and not that common in Fallout New Vegas, but there is a near universal type of environment that they can be found in. Those green irradiated sludge pools that big horners like to gather near are also the exact same places that bloatflies can be found, but they can usually live side by side just fine. There is one other kind of place that they can sometimes be found, but I'm gonna have to save that for when we get there. Bloatflies cannot hack it in the northern part of the map. They are most common in the first and second thirds of the New Vegas loop, since they are barely even a challenge for a low-level player. The biggest group is just north of Prim. Several small groups are flying around the many irradiated pools in this low area, although often many of these bloatflies will be dead at the hands of nearby powder gangers or roaming geckos. A very similar type of area that has a large population of bighorners near the Snyder Prospector Camp and the wrecked highwaymen fly and flit around, ignoring the herds of bighorners, and if I had to choose the most dangerous bloatfly spot, I guess this would have to be it. With single instances of bloatflies hanging around pools in the Eldorado Dry Lake and 2 near the Grab and Gulp rest stop not far from New Vegas, 2 medium-sized groups inhabit entirely different environments. The Good Spring Cemetery is usually the first place new players will encounter bloatflies, but there isn't any water here, irradiated or otherwise. So why are they here? Well, this is a graveyard. Heck, we were dead here for a little bit too, so could they be interested in dead and decomposing bodies? Maybe, because a more active graveyard near Camp Forlorn Hope that is presently battling and taking casualties will have a few bloatflies spawn at their graveyard, although they are almost immediately cut down by the NCR guards. The flies definitely seem drawn to dead bodies, even though these are the only 2 graveyards that have bloatflies. The second and third to last creatures are exclusive to one single location and haven't spread anywhere in the New Vegas region, although they can be found outside of the game map. Spore carriers and spore plants are the result of science run amok. The aggressive plants and an experimental pest-controlling fungus were some of the biological specimens sent to Vault 22, and they had both been engineered at Big Mountain. Again. Since literally nothing good comes from that place, it didn't take long before the spores from the pest-controlling fungus infected the scientists, taking over their minds and bodies and turning them into biological zombies. There is symbiosis between the carriers and the plants, with more dangerous carrier variants being on the lower levels of the vault. The plants are rooted to the ground, so it makes sense they may not spread at all, or spread very slowly. Spore carriers can get around just fine, however, I think they are still confined to the vault because of the harsh, dry climate of the Mojave, which is very different from the dark, lush environs of Vault 22 that they are used to. And so we have reached the final creature that we mapped out here. And no, it's not dogs. They are animals, not creatures, you jerk. And no, it's not Brahmin. Their heavy use with caravans makes mapping them a pain in the butt. But the humble, apocalypse-defying Radroach. With only 5 in the entirety of the game, it truly makes them a rare sight. In fact, some people don't even know that Radroaches are in the game at all. The first one that most people see for a very long time is usually being chased down the road north of Prim by a gecko, who nearly always catches it, and in one single bite decreases the New Vegas Radroach population by 20%. Now that's what I call pest control. The largest group though is in one single location, the Basin Creek building, where some Radroaches and giant ants are having a good old-fashioned gang war. It's pretty crazy how few Radroaches there are in the game, but cockroaches struggle in these dry desert climates in the real world to begin with, so maybe we should stop wishing for a nuclear winter, huh? This building is interesting because it is a reference for an office building that Obsidian had once worked out of and had numerous issues, including flooding, a car crash, an ant infestation, and more. And, well, I guess this would be the most difficult Radroach location because it's basically the Radroach location. Okay, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling sore and sunburned, and that wraps it up for this ambitious sermon. I hope it was enlightening, entertaining, or helped you get through some work or fall asleep. Hey, I don't judge. I'm just glad you're here. If you like what I do and want to support, then do it however you'd like. And if you would like to get some extra perks while doing so, then join these fine people on screen now on Patreon or YouTube memberships. I would like to extend a radioactive welcome to Teely Ice, Brian Bunch, Tobias Prin, Cy Pfeiffer, Matt the Rat, and Jake Russell on YouTube. Thank you for joining. As always, I need to mention my top tier Alt Adam patrons: Acrid B, Gardner Minshew Simp, Tapey Papey, Juan Vader, Dominic White, The Breadman, Tyler Eaton, Owen Balzer, Ann94, Tessa Storm, The Love Mummy, Shallowfire 13, Phantom Inc., Tater Anus, Ace Jacobs, and Cheesy Presto. Adam is pleased. Please take care of yourselves and all of Adam's creation. Remember, Adam has a special plan for you, and I will see you soon.